All right. As I said, this is your brain on brands, and this luncheon lab is all about the relationship between your brain and branding. I'm Reggie Holmes. My company is called Enthuse Creative. I am founder and creative director, and I work primarily as a brand strategist and designer for other businesses that need branding. And that could be on the consultative side or on the creative side. We're able to work on both ends of the brand building process for our small business clients. And normally I do these luncheon labs by myself, but today I have a special guest, Mr. Derek Russell, who's a licensed professional counselor and neurotherapist with Mind State Wellness Center, which is a local business here in the Northern Virginia area. And you'll get to hear from Derek a little bit later on. But since we're talking about the brain, and I'm not a scientist, I don't know all that much about the brain, to be honest. I thought it would be appropriate to bring in an expert who deals with the brain every day to give us some more detailed information and kind of relate this to branding. So we're going to work together on this particular luncheon lab to really give you some great information. And what do we hope to accomplish today? Well, before we get to our objectives, I would love to hear from you. So if you could place your name and your business in the chat. Make sure you save the chat at the end so we have each other's contact information, your name, your business, and one thing that interests you about the brain and its connection to branding, or one thing that you hope to learn or that you think is interesting about this topic of the brain and branding. If you don't deal with it all the time, it may be something that you don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but surely at some point you've thought about all the many thousands of brand messages that we're exposed to on a daily and weekly basis, and either what that's doing to your brain or how your brain is responding. So if there's anything of interest to you about this topic, I would love to learn that. So feel free to put that in the chat, and we will take questions at the end. You can put your questions or comments as we're going through the material into the chat at any time. We'll try to use the time that we have at the end to go through any comments or questions that we can't get to as we're going through the material. So please enter that information in the chat when you have a chance. And as I said, we'll look at our objectives and some takeaways. So my main objective for this particular luncheon lab is to help you be a better brander or marketer of your business. Many of you have a business or organization that you lead or represent, and you're dealing with people, and all those people have a brain. And so as you better understand what's happening in their brain as they come in contact with your branding and your messaging and your marketing, that's going to allow you to be able to hone that messaging, hone those brand signals and marketing communications to hopefully have a better impact with them. And we are all consumers of brands as well. We all buy products and services, and we are on the receiving end of those brand messages. And so the better that we understand what's happening in our own brains, we'll be able to make those buying, purchasing decisions more consciously, and just be more aware of what we're being exposed to and how it might be impacting us on a level that we're conscious of, and even on that subconscious level. So those are the objectives for today. The takeaways that we want to look at is, what is the relationship between brain and brand? Why does this connection between the brain and brand work? Why is it so effective when we do understand that? Why is it important that we know about it, that we understand sort of what's happening? We can't obviously see our brains responding to the different stimuli that are out there, but why is it important to know what's happening? And then a very important question is, how do we ethically use this information that neuroscience and neuromarketing has brought to our attention? How do we use that to be better consumers as well as better branders and marketers? So that's what we hope to get out of our time together today. So this what question, what exactly are we talking about? What's that relationship between brains and brands look like? And what is the actual background of how did we get to, where we are today? So neuroscience and neuromarketing, these are my definitions, sort of taken from definitions out there. Neuroscience is the scientific study of the brain structure, function, and performance. And so it's basically looking at the brain, trying to understand how it does what it does, how everything is connected, and what that causes us to do, how that affects the way we live and function. Neuromarketing is sort of a segment of neuroscience. It's a more recent development, but it's the measurement and study of brain activity to gain insight into consumer motivations, preferences, and decisions. So it's taking what we've learned over many centuries about the brain and how it works and applying that specifically to a marketing business context, trying to understand how those things play into the decisions that we make as it relates to buying and selling. So those two obviously closely related, and we'll be talking about how this information is used in those buying and selling contexts. A little bit of history or background. As I was researching, I found that this word emotion is related to the word motivate, and they share the Latin root movere, which means to move. And so, emotion is obviously feelings, and motivate is, that thing that inspires us to take action. And so even in the etymology, there's a connection between feelings and action and movement. When we say that something stirs us emotionally enough to take action, we might say that I was moved. I was moved to go take some action. And so we understand that there's this connection between things that are going on internally in terms of our feelings or our thoughts, and then the actions that we take. And that can obviously apply to marketing, to business. For a long time, people thought that the seat of intellect and decision-making was in the heart. Over time, we've learned that it was actually in the head. But even when we make a decision that seems like a heart decision, it's very much a head decision. And that wasn't always sort of thought of in that way. But people have been studying the brain and the heart and the connection between thinking and activity and, the brain's role in all this since ancient times. But our innovations over the last 2 centuries, I would say, have really definitely advanced our understanding of how these things are related. And there's a study, Antonio Damasio, who is a world-renowned neuroscientist. He wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And in this book, he studied people with damage to the part of the brain where emotions are generated. And he found that while they were unable to feel emotion, as you might expect, they also were unable to make decisions. And so from that, we learned that decision-making is very much tied to emotions. These people who couldn't feel, they also couldn't decide. And so there's this very powerful connection between the thinking part of our brain and our subconscious, the feeling part, and then the actions, the decisions that we need to make and actions that we want to take. And there's also another professor at Harvard. His name is Gerald Zaltman, and he wrote a book called How Customers Think: Essential Insights into the Mind of the Market. And in this book, he posits that 95% of our buying and purchasing decisions are triggered by the unconscious. So we may go into the store thinking that, I've thought through the facts and the logic, and, for these reasons, I'm going to buy this product. But what he's saying is that there's a lot of activity that we're unaware of that happens in our unconscious that actually leads us to make the buying decisions that we make. more than we have probably given credit for. So what we used to believe was that, we decide logically and that emotions were not really involved in these decisions. But what we now know is that we make decisions with our feelings, as that study made clear. And so branding and marketing, this media turns on various switches in our brains. It activates parts of our brain that make us feel certain things, and that helps to drive certain decisions and certain actions. In many ways, our brain holds on to memories, linkages, and relationships rather than lots of details and facts and figures. Those things can be lost or forgotten, but the powerful impressions, the memories, the connections emotionally, those things are embedded there deep in our brains. And it can be said that the mind is embodied. It's not just in brain. Like, we don't just think with our head, but it actually is. We think with our head and our heart. We think with our feelings, and we decide with our feelings. And so that's very powerful. And that whole connection is something that we'll look at and explore even more. So neuroscience is a powerful tool. It shows us, how data flows inside our brain, how different sections of the brain are connected, how these sections interact when we act and think in certain ways, and how we respond to certain stimuli. And so all of this is really powerful. Derek is going to take us a little bit deeper, but it's important to know that these tools are out there, and there were 2 or 3 generations ago, this wasn't available to us. But we've made rapid advancements in terms of being able to actually look at someone's brain and see what makes certain parts of their brain light up and makes activity happen, and all that's really, really powerful tools that are now available to us. So why is this important? Why should we investigate these things, learn a little bit more about this? And we see this guy deciding between 2 running shoes. They both kind of look very similar, but they're different. We're trying to make these types of decisions, right? We're trying to decide between some good options. We would love to know what's going on in his brain. Well, neuroscience, neuromarketing could tell us what's factoring into his decision. So I will pause here and turn it over to my friend Derek, who will take us a little bit deeper into the brain. And these are sorts of things that we want to be thinking about, our conscious brain and subconscious brain activity, rational and emotional decision-making, and facts and feelings. All these things are sort of in play when we think about buying decisions and trying to choose between different options. And brands know this and are taking advantage of this information to sort of help us make the decision that they want us to make. So I'll turn it over to Derek. Let me know when you're ready for me to advance to the brain slide, and you can take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Reggie. Again, honored to be a part of the presentation. But just as Reggie said, I'm a neurotherapist with Mind State Wellness Center, and so I use a few different interventions to train the brain. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about kind of go from bottom up. There are a lot of theories out there in terms of how the brain matures and advances and things like that, in terms of complexity and all that good stuff. So we're going to start with the reptilian brain. And just as Reggie said, a lot of these brand decisions that consumers make, they happen on an unconscious level. So there can be some logic that's tied into it as well. But before we even get to the logic aspect, it's the emotion that's tied, that ties us, that grabs us, that the brands tap into us. And so the lizard brain or the reptilian brain, however you like to call it, It's thought of as being the most primitive aspect of the neural network of the brain. And so it's really responsible for, preservation of self, preservation of the species, and usually involves, what I like to call and what others call the 4 F's of survival, and that's feeding, fighting, fleeing, and and mating. I'm going to say mating because it's a professional environment. And so, if a brand is able to tap into these 4 F's of survival, then typically that is how you're able to grab your consumer. And so, I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few moments as we go through the limbic system. But yeah, this reptilian brain, because it's so close to the limbic system, they often work in tandem. And so there are a few structures that I want to go over with everyone that is involved in kind of that emotional aspect, and how brands can um, really grab us and turn consumers into loyal customers. So yeah, I'm ready for the next slide, Reggie. So we're going to be looking at the limbic brain, and I'm only going to go over a few of the structures. But the limbic system, in a nutshell, structure used for our behavioral and emotional responses. And so one of the big structures of the limbic brain or the limbic system is the amygdala. And so the amygdala is thought of as kind of your fear and anxiety center. And so what the brand can do is they can create a perceived need for the consumer, um, and advertise consequences of not getting that certain product. And this will create, fear and anxious signals in the brain. And because of that, uh, naturally we want to avoid suffering. And so when we get those feelings of anxiety or fear, uh, we start to become engaged into what that brand is telling us. And we'll say, well, we don't want to have that suffering. And so we'll go with what the brand is telling us, and we'll trust that brand. And for example, a brand that tells us, hey, this toothpaste will whiten your teeth, and won't cost you that job interview, or won't cost you that bad date, or what have you. And so ourselves, we're thinking of, okay, well, we want to get that job, we want to impress that person on the date, and so in order to do that, we need white teeth. And so we go out and we buy the product that we feel that we trust will give us what we need. And so fear and anxiety are huge motivators. And once those signals are activated in the brain, it taps into that and allows us to go towards the thing that's going to extinguish that fear or anxious response. Another structure in the limbic brain is the hippocampus, and so that's a memory system, a memory center. A lot of times brands will get us to buy in by tapping into things that will stimulate a positive memory in us. And so a lot of times you'll see something where you have a family setting, people are seated around a table, and we can relate to that. It gives us those feelings of nostalgia, and a lot of times a brand will get us to trust. Brands can get consumers to trust by showing, strategically placing different things in either a commercial or an ad. And it allows us to, create those like I said, those feelings of nostalgia, make us feel good, and become consumers. And and then lastly, the hypothalamus in the limbic brain regulates the physiological responses, such as hunger, thirst, and arousal. And so a brand can use, visuals, sounds, what have you, to stimulate those physiological responses. And there's so many examples out there. But for example, you're watching something, a commercial, and you see that juicy burger, or you see the beer bottle that has the one drop of condensation running down the side. And then especially around this time of year, a lot of cologne and perfume commercials um, that the idea is to stimulate that idea of desire or being desirable. And so all of these different things, they play on our brain and send these signals and chemicals throughout our brain that hook us to the brand without even talking about the logical aspect yet. And so that's really what gets us in the beginning from an unconscious level and not even realizing it. And even with honorable mention, sense of smell is one of our most powerful senses, and that sends signals. The olfactory nerve sends signals to the limbic system to influence our behavior. And anyone can probably attest to this. Being single and you smell a certain cologne or perfume, and it makes you think of a past friend or a past ex girlfriend, an ex boyfriend, what have you, and you smell it and you say, hey, I wonder what Jenny is doing right now. Don't call Jenny. It's just your brain playing tricks on you. And so all of these different things, they play a role to really grab us before we get to the logical piece. And so lastly, we can talk about the neocortex. And I'm ready for there we go. Perfect. Uh, and so the neocortex, we're looking at the neo is new, so that's really the last part of the brain that fully matures. And so the prefrontal and frontal lobes of the neocortex are thought to be where our executive functioning and our logic and our planning and decision making and things like that. That really resides in this area. And so at this point, once the brand has already captured the consumer, um, then we can go to the store and or wherever, and we can have those logical decisions because we've already made the decision that that's the brand that we're going to trust, and so we can have that mental flexibility to weigh the pros and cons of different brands, different products. Um, but the thing that is more powerful is going to be that emotional part, the limbic part of the brain. And so when certain things are impaired, such as hunger or thirst or other types of medical or mental health diagnoses, then that's going to play a part in our decision making ability. So that decision making ability will be impaired. So, in perfect example, they always say never go to the grocery store while you're hungry because you're going to end up buying things that you probably didn't plan on buying because your brain is sending those signals, and the brands that you're seeing and the products that you're seeing are really grabbing you in because you're already hungry or you're already thirsty. Um, and same thing when it comes to mood. So if someone who's in a depressed state, their mood is going to be off, and um, those some of those areas of the limbic brain and the reptilian brain are going to influence some of that behavior when buying into certain brands. And so again, it's very interesting and funny how branding and marketing takes place on this unconscious level and not so much uh, on the logical aspect.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Great information, and I appreciate that you brought it at a level that everybody could understand and relate to. So, um, stand by. We have you coming up again in just a minute to add a little more context. But um, sort of adding on to what Derek said, thinking about branding and modern digital life, brands rule the digital world. And most of the world is digital nowadays. They have more trust and influence than governments, institutions, religions. The most valued and respected and trusted entities out there are big companies like Amazon, Google, Apple. So these big name brands are where people place their trust. And as we participate in the global digital economy, we take part in this world building that these brands are making on these platforms and different channels. And all of this is affecting our brain. We're involving ourselves in their ecosystem that they're creating, whether we intend to or not. You know, people like to say, "Oh, I'm leaving this platform," or um, I canceled or deactivated my account here." You know, well, you're still a part of the digital ecosystem in some way, shape, and form, and our brains are being influenced by the fact that so much of our world is taking place online and on these digital channels. And, you know, we rely on our brain's ability to see patterns and predictability and solve, you know, problems going from really complex to simple. That's how we function. As Derek alluded to, our most basic brain is, you know, devoted to those areas that keep us alive and help us survive. And so our brains like symbols and shortcuts, and that's, you know, making these connections between things to be able to see a pattern, solve a problem. Our brains rely on that, and so think about icons. You know, in the beginning of websites, everything was spelled out. There was not this heavy reliance on icons. Nowadays, we can use emojis and icons to basically have an entire conversation with people. And our brains like that we can communicate with symbols. And so if you think about the digital world, so much of it is symbols, icons, these little graphics that communicate key ideas. And so that's one way that we see that showing up in modern digital life. Brands and identities. You know, brands don't just want to affect, you know, the way that you think about their product or service. As Derek alluded to, they're working on maybe affecting the way that you think about yourself before you set foot in the place of purchase or go to you know, hit the shopping cart on the website. It's try to change the way you think, not only about what it is that they offer, but the way that you think about yourself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But a lot of branding and marketing today is not so much giving the facts and the you know, ingredient list and all the things that went into making the product or service. It's how will this help me to feel the way about myself that I want to feel. That's part of the challenge. And so you see brands taking that approach. Like, we don't want to think about some of the technology that's out there, rather than deep dive into the algorithms and how the technology came together. We care about what it can do and what it can do for us. And so understanding that this is sort of how brains are wired and structured has changed what the way that companies approach branding and marketing to their customers. And then branding and storytelling. Stories increase our brain activity, you know, up to 5 times. And Derek will share a little bit more information here. But lots of things happen in our brain when we take part in a story, when we hear it or see it. So did you want to share some, Derek?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so just as the slide mentions, oxytocin. So oxytocin being that feel good empathy chemical um, that's released as a social bonding, and I see, and you know, this isn't my field of branding, but when I think about branding and brands, I think of them trying to create a community, and that's what happens when the oxytocin is released in your brain. You're allowed that ability to trust more and connect more um, with the brand itself and also others that are trusting in that brand as well. And so uh, the goal of that brand is to foster that trust in the product and the brand, because once you're able to do that, just as you trust a loved one, and you're attached and connected to a loved one, it's usually hard to break that bond, and it has to take something pretty drastic, pretty significant to break that bond. And so once you're able to create that bond and create those feel good chemicals of oxytocin, then you're able to create loyal customers. And the first couple of brands that come to mind are Starbucks, and CrossFit. And I think that with those brands specifically, is that they've not only created a story to connect a consumer, but then the consumer then creates a story to tell other potential consumers, and then that builds that community.
Great. So that's a little bit about why it's important, and how it, now we want to look at how to do it and how to start to use some of those things. So there is kind of this ethical dilemma, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So knowing all this information about how the brain works, and how to perhaps manipulate the brain, with this information, there's the question of how I should do it, or and how much we should do it, right? Because most consumers are not aware of even some of the things that we've talked about today. So as a brander, as a marketer, there's, a right way to kind of leverage information, and then a wrong way. So brands have to decide how they'll use what they know. And then balancing that with the fact that consumers are becoming more aware of different tactics and tools that are available to brands to be able to glean information about what they think and how they feel. And obviously with some of the technology-based companies, there's algorithms and sort of tracking, the hot spots on the website and things like that, where we can find out what is important to people, what they're thinking, what's going into the decision making. And so there's lots of questions and issues around how to use that information. Let's see, one great example is what's gone on with Facebook and Instagram. Recently, Facebook it came out that they had information going back as far as March 2020, and that showed that Instagram was the platform that was most used by adolescents, but it was harmful to teen girls' body image, self-esteem, and overall well-being. So they had this data. They knew that their platform was used by that population the most, and yet it was having, negative impact on this particular audience. But they did not, release those findings. They did not do anything to sort of curb that. And so that, has come out, and, people are upset about that. But it just goes to show that these companies, in many cases, they have knowledge about how their tools, their products and services are impacting you, and it could be positive or negative. And so now that the customer, knows, they can make different decisions about whether they choose to continue to engage in that, or in this case, a parent can discern that this social media tool, which ideally is supposed to be fun, and it's a place where they can have some kind of community with peers. Instead we're told to follow these people that are portraying a picture of life that's not realistic, that's not attainable for us. And so it's causing people to feel bad about their own lives, which is not the goal. So that parent makes a decision to not allow their child to partake in the social media platform or something like that. So decisions have to be made based on, the effect that we know that these things are having on our brains, our feelings, and, just our behavior. So that's one sort of example from real life. But that knowledge of what this tool can do to a young girl's self-esteem is really powerful. And so the right thing to do would be to make some changes. But there's also the profit motive, which says, hey, we know this, but we're going to hold on to this information. We're not going to change anything. And so as more and more information is out there, more and more of these tough decisions will have to be made by marketers and branders, and also consumers. So it's both an art and a science, though, when we think about how to use what we know about the brain. They're the things that we think of as art that go into influencing our brain. If we think about how all the senses are involved, there's color, there's typography, the fonts you use, scale, the size of things, packaging that we touch. It's fun sometimes to open packaging. It's more fun than like using the product is seeing how it comes boxed and unboxing it, right? The point of sale displays, billboards and digital advertising, like there's so many different ways to capture attention through the eyes, through the brain, through emotions, and all these other things. And then there's like the more scientific tools that are available, like eye tracking, brain scanning, and some of the analytics tools that are used to gather data about customers and decisions. So those with the most resources that make the most use of this information that we can know about the brain, it kind of use a little bit of both. It's never just, well, we've got all the data, but you've got to actually create a product that is attractive to people in these other ways and is gonna get them to start to form a relationship with the brand. So it's art and science. And then we talked a little bit about, this idea of multisensory branding. So it's, the eyes, the emotions, logic and reason play a part there. Words and verbal, it's look and feel, touch, Derek reference, smell. All these things can be involved when it comes to forming that relationship with the brand, how the brand is trying to make a connection with us and get us to make a decision. There's a study that showed that we see with our brain. So more than 50% of that cortex, the outer surface of the brain, is devoted to processing visual information. And we know that it takes less than a second to sort of form an impression about a brand based on the verbals. I mean, based on the visual. But the verbal messaging must support what we see with our eyes. And so all these things kind of work together to get a response from us that hopefully, for the brand's sake, results in making a decision to purchase. So all these things are tied in together. And the more that we know about how they work together, the better we can hopefully put ourselves in a position of someone who is looking to buy our product or service. We don't want to just skip ahead to exploiting that to get them to buy. We really want to use that to make a connection with them. And so one example is this Coke campaign. This is a new campaign. This is the first sort of reimagination of the Coca-Cola brand that they've done in 5 years. And the campaign is called Real Magic. And this is from their website. It says, the Real Magic brand philosophy is rooted in the insight that magic lives in unexpected moments of connection that elevate the everyday into the extraordinary. A timeless learning that feels more relevant than ever in today's hyper-connected yet divided world. Real magic happens when people get together and when what we share in common is greater than what sets us apart. That sounds amazing. That's not just drinking a cold soda, right? That's speaking to a whole lot more than that. And so this is sort of an idea of how a brand might activate some of these, ideas that we've talked about today. They've kind of changed the shape of the traditional Coca-Cola logo to sort of wrap it around, like that's how it would look on an actual Coke bottle, kind of wrapped around like that. Um, so there's that sort of evoking that classic iconic shape that we know really well, and all the images sort of show people embracing together, reinforcing that idea of connection and magic. Uh, in that little spiel that I read, they say nothing about drinking Coke, and that's what I want to kind of emphasize, is that clearly this is for Coca-Cola, but there's only a few images of, Coke, right? There are lots of images of people embracing human relationships. And so by making this association between something that we need and desire, they're strengthening our association with that product, right? The next time we are together with someone that we love, uh, sharing an embrace, why not share a Coke? Like it fits those moments. That's sort of what this is trying to communicate. So this is a recent, I think, pretty good example of how they're trying to tie these mental, emotional concepts together, and make it about more than just the actual product, which is just, a bottle of soda, right? It's much deeper than that. And so, as you pay attention to brands in the wild, you'll sort of see these associations being made, and this approach. And as they said, in this hyper connected yet divided world, they know that people want more of this, right? Like we were just in a period where you couldn't really hug your loved ones like this, right? This is the next time you're able to actually physically be with someone that you love, why not share a Coke, right? It fits these moments. So that's what they're trying to communicate. Here's another a commercial. You'll be able to pick up on what it's for. But I want you to think about all the different things that we talked about today, and how the actual product fits in here, but this is a great story. So just pay attention to the story. 1 second. That was a great great ad, right? Hold on, let me stop sharing for a second. Yeah. So really quickly, any impressions on that? Like, what did you feel as you watched that? What did you think about how they, you know, tied in the product or service and then the story that was being told?
Reggie, I love the story. Very emotional. I mean, I felt it throughout. But if I were to try to remember who, what the company is, I'm not sure I would remember the company. I love the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that wasn't really the intent of that particular ad. I mean, they're kind of ubiquitous, so they don't need to force it on you, but it's really about making you remember that story. Like I'm able to connect who did the ad and then what the story, but I'm drawn to the story, and so they're kind of banking on that. Anyone
the
else?
timeliness of the story and the canceled performance and the canceled, of everything that, all of our kids have gone through. And then to, see the family pull together, see the friends pull together, and deliver, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So many examples like that in, modern sort of branding. But that is kind of the approach that, a lot of people are taking as it relates to their brand. Hang on 1 second, guys. I'm trying
Definitely all about the feeling, which is the reason I love the Budweiser commercials. The emotion and the feeling in those.
And I would like that flashlight because that looked like it had quite an amazing spotlight beam for, 3D batteries or something.
Right.
I thought it was a great spot because Amazon didn't hit you over the head with their logo and their packaging and 30 seconds just about them. It was very subtle. You kind of had to watch for it.
Yeah. I'm trying to get my screen back. It's taking over my whole screen. So anyway, we can continue our discussion. But basically, so this requires consistency. Our brains kind of perceive meta communication, so nonverbal cues, the colors, the fonts, spacing, all those types of things, even if we don't consciously pay attention to it. So it's kind of to what Marie said, we don't necessarily remember at first, like Amazon, it's kind of thrown in there. But we do remember the story. We are moved by the story. And that's what this sort of approach is banking on. And that consistent branded experience produces familiarity. Like we can all kind of relate to, maybe not specifically having our dance recital canceled, but we've had things canceled, right? We've had plans that were made go awry because of the pandemic, and the idea is that, hey, Amazon is reliable, this is the thing that can kind of save the day. The show must go on. Like we've got to get back to actual, sort of life and the way we were living. And Amazon is kind of that consistent thing that can help us do that. And what it also allows us to do is to, when we want to create surprise, like we have to be intentional about it. So we're intentional about being consistent. And then, so when things our brains don't necessarily like surprise, they do, but it just has to be intentionally done. And so the more consistent you are, when you do introduce surprise or an element that was not expected or predictable, we can have great effect with it because of the way that our brains sort of crave pattern and consistency and predictability. All right, so some last thoughts. as a brander or marketer, this understanding of neuroscience and neuromarketing allows you to put more emphasis on the consumer. It allows you to know why they buy. We buy emotionally and justify logically. When you're trying to figure out your customer, you can understand the emotional factors that are motivating them. And that's, in some ways, that's more important than the immediate outcome of whether or not they buy right now. It's knowing the reasons why they buy. That's really powerful. And so this brain science allows us to be able to do that better. And then as consumers, it allows us to be conscious of our consumption, why we're led to product A versus product B. If we think about that guy that was in our picture trying to, choose between one of the running shoes and the other one. So it's good for us to be informed while we're perusing and while we're purchasing about, why we're doing what we're doing. So I have some book recommendations when I can share my screen again. I don't know when I'll be able to do that. I also have information about our next workshop, which will be the third Friday in November. And that one is on shapes, symbols, and systems. And so it's all about how our world basically relies on these shapes and symbols and how they create systems or languages that we really have built for ourselves since the beginning of time, when man was writing on caves and hieroglyphics and things like that. Like we've used these systems to be able to live and survive and grow. And so, we kind of look at a little historical survey of systems and of symbols, and just talk a little bit about how brands use those symbols to communicate what they want to communicate about their businesses. So that's it. That's the workshop. Is there any questions, any comments or feedback that anyone has?